Hello and welcome to this very special CNBC Africa broadcast. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. We're coming to you live from the Africa Investment Forum in Johannesburg, South Africa, in a conversation that we have dubbed the Presidential Investment Chats. And in these conversations, we're going to be unpacking and exploring some of the concrete and transformative actions that our leaders of governments, heads of state, and prime ministers that are joining us here today are spearheading and championing in their respective countries. We also have the voice of business joining us in these conversations, and they are going to be bringing their insights and their experiences into these conversations of doing business in Africa. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Thank you, Your Excellencies. A big round of applause and a welcome for His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo. Welcome to the President of the Republic of Ghana. We are also, of course, joined by His Excellency Alpha Condé, the President of the Republic of Guinea. Your Excellency, welcome. It's with a great pleasure that this panel also has His Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Vice President Osinbajo. Thank you, Osinbajo. Thank you very much, sir. And of course, we're joined by Mr. Patrice Motsepe, the Executive Chairman of African Rainbow Minerals. Thank you very much for being here, sir. I'm going to go straight to Ghana first, and I'm going to come to you, Your Excellency. If we look at the Ghanaian economy, you've outperformed the global economy. Political stability has been part and parcel of the narrative coming out of Ghana. We're seeing an improvement in the rankings in terms of the ease of doing business. And most recently, some of the leading publications globally are calling Ghana Africa's leading light. What are some of the big reforms that you believe have attracted and secured the attention of the investment community and helped to shape the perception that we're seeing of Ghana today?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel discussion. All of us have to be grateful to Dr. Adesina for making this whole occasion possible. I think that the focus that is bringing the limited success that we're seeing in Ghana is that government is focused on trying to do what it needs to do, which is not, first of all, to get away from any idea that government is a competitor of our private sector, and that government can substitute itself for the private sector. The role of government, in our view, is to be a facilitator for the development of the Ghanaian private sector. And that has been the focus of our government. So the fundamental issues, establishing a clear perception about the rule of law in Ghana. The rule of law in Ghana working not just for Ghanaians, but also for foreigners who decide to invest in our economy. Secondly, to improve the capacity of the state itself to manage the country and manage the economy of the country. And there's something very important. Less than 6% of our people are part of the tax-paying population of our country. 1.5 million people pay tax in Ghana in a population of nearly 30 million people. That's what? Something like 6% of the population. That's an unacceptable set of figures. But it is feasible because the state itself at the moment still doesn't dispose of the capacity to be able to make sure that all those who should be in the tax net are in the tax net. So that's a major focus of my government. How are we going to broaden the tax base? We're talking in Ghana about a vision of a Ghana beyond aid. Essentially what it means is that we believe we're capable of financing our own development out of our own resources. But if only 6% of our people are within the tax net, that already poses a major structural problem. So that's an important focus for government. A third focus for government is the appropriateness of policy.
Right.
Because we've seen in all the other parts of the world which have succeeded that a major function of that success has been appropriate policy. What are you going to be able to do to stimulate industrial activity? What are you going to be able to do to stimulate the transformation of your agriculture, to make it more productive, to give you greater output? What are you going to do to rationalize the effectiveness of your financial sector? So those are the measures that are occupying the attention of my government.
Let's just stay on the point of policy, please, Your Excellency. You speak about the appropriateness of policy, and we know that underlying appropriateness is that the policy needs to be responsive to the real need on the ground. The policy needs to be agile because oftentimes the environment and the dynamics are changing, but the policy also needs to be sharp. It needs to be sharp in the sense that it's really dealing with the key issue and unlocking the opportunity that it's supposed to. How are you ensuring that in Ghana, the conversation between the private sector and the public sector is robust and that it's allowing you to really be close to the ground so that the policy is indeed appropriate?
Take, for instance, agriculture. When we came, the growth of agriculture was in negative figures. We brought a policy we are calling planting for food and jobs, which is essentially the government giving a certain targeted support. Ghanaian agriculture is essentially smallholder agriculture, families owning small acres of land who are responsible for producing both our food as well as our cash crops. So the planting for food and jobs, the first year of it identified 200,000 smallholder farmers who were the recipients of support, first of all, for inputs, insecticides, fertilizers. We made sure that they were also had access to extension officers so that they could get that technical support that they needed. This year, the program was broadened from 200,000 to 500,000.
Right.
And the impact it has made in terms of yields of agriculture, i.e. the productivity of our farmers, as well as on its output, is quite dramatic.
Right.
We're seeing a much greater output of food, stuffs in our markets across the country than we saw 3 or 4 years ago. That is the connection that we're trying to make, to see how we can bring the authority, whatever authority government has, to support these initiatives with appropriate policy. Our goal is that within 4 years, 1 million farmers will be in this program. We moved from 200 to 500 this year, and we're intending to move to 1 million by the end of the program.
I love the fact that, Your Excellency, that you're bringing numbers, because we're going to hold you to that. A growth from 200 to 400 with a target to get to 1 million. 500 currently, with a target to get to 1 million. And we're going to hold you to that. But talking about numbers, Mr. Vice President, let's come to you, because Nigeria has been very bold about sticking numbers to its own aspirations. It's, it's been reported that Nigeria aims and has plans to move into the top 100 in terms of the world's ranking of the ease of doing business. And if you remember, in 2017, Nigeria was sitting at 169th in terms of the ease of doing business. In 2018, that moved to 145th. So we're seeing the trajectory going forward. And the target is that by 2020, Nigeria is going to be in the top 100 countries in the ease of doing business. What needs to happen now to ensure that that milestone is achieved, and what is currently happening in Nigeria to ensure that that milestone is well within reach?
Thank you very much. Again, let me just thank President Akufo-Addo for this game-changing conference. What we need to do and what we're doing in Nigeria is deepening the reforms that started effectively in 2016 around issues of ease of doing business. The president constituted a presidential enabling business environment council, which I have the privilege of chairing. And basically we're looking at reforms in the area of entry and exit of people, construction permits, a national trade platform, getting credit, providing power, etc. And we picked those specific areas because we knew that those were the weak areas and focused on reforming those areas. And what we've seen is that by focusing on those particular areas, we've been able to make incremental change. Nigeria is a large country, as you know. We have 36 states and a federal capital, as well, as well, of course, as you know, a huge private sector. So reform also means reforming the subnationals. So subnationals also have to reform. So, for example, Lagos, which has, which is the commercial nerve center of Nigeria, takes almost 60% of commerce. And so without reforming business practices, regulatory practices in Lagos, you can't change very much. It's also about the 6th largest economy in Africa. Yeah. So that really is a considerable part of the business, even of the continent. So what we've done in Lagos to work as federal government with Lagos on issues around ease of doing business, getting credit, construction permits, which are very, very important, registering property, getting title, and all, all the other issues around ease of doing business. Also with Kano, which is another very large economy, and by deepening reforms in the states, we've also managed to move the needle in terms of ease of doing business across the country. So those are the sorts of issues that we're looking at. Of course, ensuring also that there's policy consistency is a very important issue for us, and ensuring that the private sector is truly a partner and that the private sector leads in that partnership. That's extremely important for us. So we've established what is called an Industrial and Competitiveness Council and a quarterly business forum where we meet with all of the businesses, both large and small, and the whole idea, of course, is to together work on policy and to together formulate what we think, what is our vision, especially in the coming years. Recently, we added to that what is called the Technology and Creativity Advisory Council. Now, this takes into account a lot of the new businesses, especially fintech companies, a lot of the young men and women who are involved in technology and entertainment. And they are now part of that Industrial and Competitiveness Council, and we're working with them to look at policy. The fintech companies, for example, as you know, are challenging, if you like, some of the old laws on banking and all of that.
Let's jump to that very quickly, Your Excellency, because I think you've raised some really important points, and I'm going to come back to the depth that you speak about in terms of reforms, because oftentimes we get the breadth right, but the experience of doing business in different parts of the country isn't always the same. But I want to just tap into this point that you're raising about fintechs and how they are challenging the regulatory environment. They're coming in at a pace that is unprecedented and coming in with products and innovations that we've never seen before. So how do we ensure that regulation enables the development of these emerging businesses and doesn't constrain the potential of what these emerging businesses can actually deliver?
Yes, I think the first thing is to allay the fears of the banks that their lunch isn't being taken away, because the banks, of course, are jittery about some of what is happening in the fintech space. So they need to be assured that this isn't about taking their lunch, but that we cannot avoid what is coming to us now. What we're seeing is that payment systems, lending, all sorts of financial products, even insurance, are happening much faster. So we have to change regulation, and we must ensure that we give space to these tech companies, because what is happening is that there is a quick convergence between technology and financial products, so much faster than many of the banks are able to cope with. So what we're trying to do is work with the banking system, the Central Bank of Nigeria, for example. We're sitting together with the fintech companies, the banks, and the telcos, because the telcos are also in this space now, and many of them are challenging some of what used to be traditional banking businesses. So we're trying to work with all of these individuals, trying to work with all of these different businesses, and trying to bring them all together. But the major issue is that technology is clearly going to disrupt the financial space and is doing so already. So banks have to reform, they have to invest, even in some of the fintech companies themselves, and they've got to see this revolution as really, inevitable. And I think that what we're seeing today is the reform around that space, and many of the banks, of course, are looking up and understanding that this is going to happen, and it's already happening. So you find a lot of the fintech companies are already, in some senses, mini banks. But it's a regulatory challenge as well, because you've got to ensure that that space is not open to all manner of individuals who want to deceive the public, or who want to make money off the public in ways that might be illegal or unlawful. Yes.
And I think that's a really strong insight, because what I'm hearing, Your Excellency, is that we need to be mindful that with disruption also comes opportunity, the emergence of new sectors, new investment opportunities, new collaborations and partnerships that can come out of that. But let's go to the Republic of Guinea. Your Excellency, for a very long time, the headlines around Guinea have focused on the epidemic that the country experienced in terms of Ebola, but the headlines are changing, and the perceptions are changing as the country has come out of this epidemic. We're also seeing a lot of the perception around the opportunity in Guinea also changing. Perhaps you can just talk to us briefly around the key reforms that are in place to restore confidence of the business and the investment community back into Guinea.
Merci beaucoup. Je dois d'abord remercier notre frère Adesina.
I would like to thank very much our brother Adesina for the opportunity he's giving us to be able to express ourselves in front of such an important panel. I think that when I was elected in 2011, was then everything, in fact, in Guinea was not ready as in so many other countries. There were many things we still needed to obtain. We needed to concentrate ourselves on economic reforms, which is not easy at all, as you know. And we have been able to solve in 2 years many of these problems in terms of agricultural reform and debts. We have, in fact, put in place very important reforms. We reformed the army. We have also done another reform which was, in fact, accompanied by other international partners. We also did fundamental economic reforms. And then Guinea was considered, in fact, as a geological scandal, and as a country that needed to go forward, since it was actually so late. We needed to adopt also a mining code, because before that, people just used to come and have permits, and for 4 or 5 years, we didn't even know where the mines were. So we needed to institute reforms, and my brother here knows something. So these reforms, in fact, allowed us to give 800 permits and also to change the situation. We needed also, we have great bauxite deposits, so very, very important. And in 2 years, we hope to be able to become producers of bauxite, and not only bauxite, but the transformation, of course, in aluminium. Because, of course, when you get to 15 million in terms of production, we need to transform that in aluminium. We are in an initial phase of development now to be able to transform transform this bauxite into aluminium. We've also got cobalt, and so we've got other minerals. We're trying to do geophysical studies to be able to explore and exploit these other minerals. We've also got agribusiness, which is very important, and I think our brothers of the African Development Bank are helping us with this. We do have certain advantages. We've got 100 to 200 tons, in fact, of boats, in fact, or ships that carry this bauxite. That is also extremely important in terms of the harbors, and Guinea, Senegal, Ivory Coast, of course, all involved. Because, of course, when boats, in fact, come with empty containers, we'll then be able to then transport other material, so to be able to go to our foreign countries next door. So it is clear that the mines are in fact extremely important in terms of energy and infrastructure, but do not always eliminate poverty. So it is agribusiness, in fact, which will lead us to finding solutions. So we needed to revolutionize totally at the moment our farmers use telephone technology, they use their cell phones, they use Orange, for example, they're able to order tractors or order any materials that they need, feed. So this has facilitated, the cell phone usage has facilitated business. So we also, this is also a new revitalization. We've also got new reforms. Our tax reforms as well we are putting in place. We've now got the AC who is helping us in Addis Ababa, but also internal reforms are in fact being conducted. We're trying certainly we've done an enormous amount of reforms, and we're now beginning to see the results of this reforms. We're also transforming our harbor as well. That's also very important, so that we continue with Mali and Burkina.
Thank you very much for a very impressive list of reforms that are currently underway. Before I come to Mr. Motsepe, I just have another final question. You touched on reforms in the tax space, and we know that some of the challenges in Guinea have been about navigating the tax environment, not only for domestic players, but also for investors who have described the tax regime as quite complicated. How are you simplifying the tax regime? How are you making paying taxes for investors easier and simpler and faster?
Bon, avec l'appointement des amis que je viens de citer, nous sommes en train de...
we are trying to simplify methods in terms of external trade. Of course, we want to facilitate investment as much as possible, and also custom facilitating, but also our fiscal policies we are trying to change. Much of our economy is informal, and they do not pay taxes. So with our friends, we are trying to see how we can improve this. We've also got an investment code, which is very favorable to investors. And I think we've now created a ministry for investments. And this is now, in fact, headed by somebody who can give us a great deal of investment, because somebody worked for a bank before. Because our weakness is that we do not communicate enough. So there is not enough knowledge, in fact. So we need to, in fact, improve our communication so that businessmen, in fact, know what the possibilities are in terms of investment.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Again, some really key insights that you've brought to the table. I want to come to you, Mr. Motsepe. We've heard from the various leaders of government speaking about the different reforms, the different programs, the different initiatives that are underway in their respective countries. As a businessman on the continent, what matters most?
Well, we do business in about 40 countries on the continent. And it's absolutely important that we recognize the excellent work that the heads of state on the continent, the countries, the legislative, the fiscal, the monetary policies that are in place, the overall competitiveness. You know, what is very interesting is that sometimes I need to go to Silicon Valley to hear some of the most exciting technological advancements that are being made by companies in Silicon Valley with the most advanced technology in the world, and the successes that is being experienced in different parts of the continent. So there have been challenges. You know, it's very interesting because many of the presidents here, over the last 20, 25 years, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, in China, Japan, different parts of the world, the discussions then was about how to create legislative, regulatory policies in Africa to make Africa globally competitive. Sometimes we do not give Africa the credit and the recognition it deserves, because 25 years ago, and the path that has been traveled over the last 25 years has indeed resulted in Africa being a globally competitive destination for foreign investment. Are there still challenges in Africa? Will there still be challenges in Africa? Absolutely yes. There's no continent in the world where there are no challenges. In fact, there's no country in the world.
Yeah.
I was watching the midterm elections last night in America. And
why would you do that to yourself?
It's very exciting because it makes you realize that the most developed, the most advanced economy in the world has got challenges of its own. Huge division in terms of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and various other issues, but we are here to talk about Africa. So the point I want to make is we should not be discouraged if there are challenges in the DRC, and there are problems in the DRC, and we are at meetings with the CEOs of the largest companies in the world, and I learn when we are in closed meetings,
right,
where Chatham House rules applies. And you sit there with the CEOs of the largest companies in the world, and they tell you about what's happening in Africa. At times, Aliko and I look at each other and we say, do you realize we are the only two Africans here? And this is a meeting of the CEOs of the 100 largest companies in the world. So all I want to say in conclusion is there's a lot of absolutely significant investment that's taking place. We have invested in excess of $4 billion. Companies that we are associated with have invested in excess of $4 billion over the last 5 to 10 years in Africa. There's a lot of investments that emanates from Africa.
Right.
South African companies have invested billions and billions of dollars in Africa, not because they're doing Africa a favor. Africa is the home of all of us, but because there are exciting investment opportunities.
But let me be difficult, because I think at the core of my question is understanding that we can't boil the ocean all at once, and that there's a lot of beautiful things that we can do to improve the business environment. But if we were to have something called the Motsepe Index that was going to measure or give the key reasons why Patrice Motsepe and Associates would go and invest in an African country, what would be the 3 big variables of the Motsepe Index that if these 3 things are met, I'm going to put dollars on the ground?
Let me tell you, 25 years ago, the World Economic Forum did an assessment of what does it take, not just in terms of assessing a country, what you call this index, but they evaluate countries and they stake and rank countries on the continent and elsewhere in terms of global competitiveness. Now, I don't want to mention some countries. Let's look at Angola. Angola did very badly in terms of its assessment. They looked and said, tell us about the Constitution. Does the Constitution protect property rights? Do you have regular elections? Now, Angola passes all of those tests. But the point I make is, there were countries 25 years ago that had challenges and were not doing well in terms of this index of assessment of whether that country is ranked very highly as an investment destination. But despite that, tens of billions of dollars went into those countries. So what I'm saying to you is, I'm not saying those indexes are not important. They are very, very important. But entrepreneurs go into countries, and we find that the countries where we tend to do better than others are the ones which, after extensive evaluation and assessment, we've got globally listed companies, so the money we invest is shareholders' money. So we've got to explain to them, why did you we've just invested $1 billion buying one of the largest financial services companies in Africa. And they were asking us, why are you doing this? And we explained to them that we will create value. We invested $1 billion in India. So they say, but why do you take the money that we thought some of it was going to go to India, and it goes to Africa? And the simple answer is, you will realize that we have indeed, both in terms of the increase in the share price, but also in terms of the dividends we've given you, proven that Africa is a globally competitive destination, and the returns are very, very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Motsepe. Africa is globally competitive, and the returns are real. I've got less than 5 minutes left. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to attempt it. Your Excellency, President Addo, I want to come back to you. I want to talk about corruption. And in particular, because you have gone and set up the Office of the Special Prosecutor, you've stepped up to the corruption challenge, and you're saying we're not shying away from this issue. We want to make sure that every dollar that is intended to invest in this country does so. And for every Ghanaian who's supposed to benefit from this from a development outcomes perspective does benefit. Talk to us a little bit about the rationale of being so bold and so brave in setting up this special office.
I think the reason is obvious. All of us are aware of how distorting and damaging corruption in our public sector has been, and the evident need for us to do something about it. I don't think this is a matter that requires any serious analysis or a lot of talk. It's a fact. All of us know it as a fact. And the next issue is, what are you going to be able to do about it? You have to begin by looking at the institutions to see how you can have institutions that are capable of dealing with it. And then the office is there, but there's also the attitude of those of us who are in office. I've taken the view that we have to make an example, we who are in office in Ghana, so that if allegations are made, evidence is given which suggests that, for instance, members of my administration are indulging in corrupt acts. Anytime an allegation is made, I've seen to it that it's investigated. So far, the investigations have not yielded any serious evidence, but it is important that it is known that people in the administration will themselves be subject to scrutiny if they go off schedule. So I think there's those two things. First of all, the institutional arrangements, which is what the office is about, and secondly, the attitudes of myself and those who are in government about the issue of corruption. Those are the two ways in which we're trying to handle the matter.
Thank you very much. It's an institutional capacity and institutional arrangements as well as attitude, because I think that's a brilliant insight, given that we need to build institutions that are reflective of the aspiration that we have as a country. And the special office for special prosecution is very important. Mr. Vice President, I'm going to come to you. I love the point you made earlier about being very deliberate about ensuring that the experience of doing business in Lagos is the same as the experience of doing business in other parts of the country. Now, some of the data that I've pulled shows that if you want to resolve a commercial dispute, it's going to take you 720 days in Kano but probably less than 400 days in Lagos. Again, this speaks to this difference in experience. How are you ensuring that when we look at Nigeria and the investment potential and the investment opportunity, we're able to look at the entire country in its totality? How do we ensure that the policies that you are leveraging and using are far-reaching and are not just concentrated in the big commercial centers and the big commercial hubs in the country?
Yeah. What in terms of a practical approach to that we've done is through what we call the National Economic Council. Now, the National Economic Council is a council which I have the privilege of chairing, and it is a council that takes all of the state governors. Every state governor is a member of that council, and we meet once a month. Now, what we try to do is to look at policies and try and see what best practices are and how we can share those best practices and ensure that everyone is on the same page. So that's helped a great deal. It's helped us, for example, to set the fast-track courts in Lagos as a model for several of the other states, and several of the other states are also using fast-track courts and are developing their own systems along those same lines. So where we have strengths, where Kano has strength, for example, in registration of property, we produce this and we present this as an example, as best practice for everyone to see. So we're laying broadband infrastructure, for example. Some of the states have good practices with broadband infrastructure, and we're trying to make that, we're trying to make that spread across all of the states.
The pockets of excellence. So taking where we've got pockets of excellence and trying to make sure that we extrapolate those to the broader country. Yep. I'm going to ask a final question. I've got a monitor that's screaming at us that our time is up. I'm going to ask a final question to His Excellency President Condé. Your Excellency, you spoke about the opportunity that comes with bauxite and a range of other minerals that are available in Guinea. We know the African experience, and in fact, we've been very clever about terming it a resource curse in many markets where we've seen great resources not actually contributing to prosperity, and great resources that we see investment coming in, but that's not translating into developmental outcomes. What is Guinea doing to ensure that this new opportunity does not go in the same historical trajectory that we've seen in other countries? How are you avoiding or ensuring that you're going to avoid the resource curse?
First of all, our mining code is actually put in place very precise issues. First of all, local content, if we talk about bauxite, and very important also transport. So all the transportation of bauxite are destined at the moment just to Guineans. So no foreign company, in fact, is in fact involved in this transport, and it has to be put at, if any international company is there, it has to be at the disposal of the locals. If you sign a contract, for example, where bauxite is concerned, automatically our government is 15% and then 7%. So it means that we've actually taken lessons from other countries, contracts, for example, with China, in terms of infrastructure.
So as to carry out and transport those raw materials. However, we did not actually, we would give approximately 1,700. In terms of financing, what we do is that we repay in royalties after a number of years, and then after a certain period of time, the revenue goes back to Guinea. You have China, and of course you do have the Americans that have been there for a number of years. Abu Dhabi is present as well, the United Kingdom, Russia, as well as others. So we are doing everything possible so as to make sure that the mining zone is not just an area to be developed. So what we seek is actually to allow for the agriculture to develop in the region by developing all of the surrounding lands, and also to make sure that we would have crops that would be produced throughout the year. So those investors would have also the obligation to invest in agriculture as well as infrastructures and also in schools, so that these do not turn into islands that will simply
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And ladies and gentlemen, there we have it live from Johannesburg in South Africa. That is, of course, His Excellency Nana Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Alpha Condé, President of the Republic of Guinea, His Excellency Yemi Osinbajo, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and Mr. Patrice Motsepe, Executive Chairman of African Rainbow Minerals. I'm Osinbajo for CNBC Africa. Thank you for joining us.